Today we're going to talk about the novel The Stranger by the French writer Albert Camus. The Stranger, or L'étranger, was first published in French in 1942, but it is widely available in English translation and indeed in many other languages. Just a note on the title. The Stranger is the title of the translation into American English, but I think the British translation is The Outsider. I say this just in case you ever come across a novel by Camus entitled The Outsider. Know that it is just a British translation of L'étranger. It's the same novel. So to avoid any confusion, I am going to refer to this novel as The Stranger for the rest of this review. If you're new to my reviews, let me just quickly tell you that I usually begin by talking a little bit about the author and the context in which the book I am reviewing was written. But I only center on those details that I think are important to understand the book and enjoy it more. So, in the case of The Stranger, I think it is impossible to discuss the novel without discussing its author first. So let's do that. So Albert Camus was born in French Algeria in 1913. The North African country, officially known as the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria, was then part of the French Empire. So we referred to it as French Algeria or colonial Algeria to distinguish it from the nation that was established after it gained independence from France in 1962, after, as you probably know, a war that began in 1954. Now, as a French descendant born in Algeria, in his case he was a second-generation French-Algerian, Camus was considered a pied noir, in English Blackfoot, by French people from the mainland. So this was the name used to, pied noir was the name used to refer to all French descendants born in colonial Algeria. So-called pied noirs were full citizens, full French citizens, who, unlike the majority Arab and Berber populations of French Algeria, had many privileges. So even though Albert Camus was poor growing up, he was still much better off than most other children in the colony. Albert Camus' father died fighting in World War I when he was still a baby, so he never really met his father. Albert Camus grew up in a rural environment, and so how can someone like that grow up to be one of the most famous and best acclaimed French writers, not only, I think, of the 20th century, but of all time? I think the question points us to a teacher who had a big influence in Camus' life, and thanks to whom he got a scholarship that allowed him to study beyond basic instruction. The name of that teacher was Louis Germain. He was when Camus was in the French equivalent of high school, he got TB, but he continued to study. So young Camus became interested in philosophy thanks to the influence of another teacher, Jean Grenier. Later, Camus went to university in Algiers and graduated in philosophical studies. And this is also important, philosophical studies, philosophy. He worked as a journalist in Algiers, but he began writing fiction early on as well. He moved to Paris, fleeing persecution from his work as a left-wing journalist in Algeria. In Paris, he began working on The Stranger, and he lived in France during World War II, during the German occupation, therefore, and the rest of his life, in fact. But I don't think those events are that relevant to The Stranger. Although they are relevant to other novels like The Plague, for instance. Camus was also a playwright and an essayist. His most famous plays are probably Caligula and The Misunderstanding. So there's plenty to sink your teeth into if you're interested in Camus' writing. He died in mainland France in 1960 at the age of only 46, and I think that's all you really need to know about Albert Camus to understand and enjoy The Stranger. In fact, you can actually enjoy this novel without knowing anything about Camus' background, but I think the novel would make a lot more sense to you if you knew those things about his life that I have just spoken about. So I hope that's helpful to you. Perhaps the central irony in Camus' life, at least in terms of what affected his writing, is that once he moved to Paris, he felt like a foreigner. And here I should point out that the French word étranger can be translated into English as both stranger and foreigner. It could also be translated as outsider, which I think explains why this novel has been translated as both the stranger and the outsider. But I think both translations miss a nuance that the French word has. That nuance has something like a sense of not belonging, and that is how Camus felt in Paris, like he didn't quite belong there, like a foreigner. So even though his novel The Stranger is set in Algeria, he wrote it in Paris, where he felt like a foreigner. The Stranger came out during World War II, as I say, and the first English translation came out in 1946. I have linked to the Matthew Ward translation in the description box for this video because I understand that that is the most recent American translation and it seems to be very well regarded, but I've only read it in French. Actually, the first time I read The Stranger, I was in high school and I read it in Spanish translation. I have read it many times since, and every time I reread it in French. So I can't comment on the quality of that American translation as someone who has read it could. Having said that, I've read that translation, the Matthew Ward translation, is good. Anyway, no matter what language you read The Stranger in, something that I think most people or everyone notices when they pick up The Stranger is the simplicity of the language used. The novel is told by the protagonist himself, Meursault, so the novel is a first-person narration. And the language Meursault uses couldn't be any simpler. It is also a short novel, so you might be tempted to breeze through it, but of course, all this is quite deceptive because The Stranger is in fact a complex novel. One of the best things I think about reading The Stranger is that the reader gets involved. You need to get involved in the story because there is no one there to guide you. There is no moral compass to the story, as it were. Meursault is a very matter-of-fact character, so it is up to the reader to interpret his behavior and understand why he does the things he does in the novel. Meursault never reflects on his actions or what happens around him. He just lays it all down in front of you in the first person, and it is you, the reader, who must deal with that. The Stranger is often classified as a philosophical novel, an existential novel. But Camus hated that and rejected that existentialist label. But it is up to you, the reader, to read any of that into the novel or not. So the narrator/protagonist never expresses anything we could qualify as philosophical. The novel is not contemplative at all. In fact, it is action-packed, okay? It is up to you, once again, to think about what happens in the novel and interpret it. You give it your interpretation, I give it mine. I don't want to go into the plot, lest I be accused of spoiling the novel, but let's just say that Meursault may or may not be a despicable character, and yet you might find yourself liking him by the end. And when that happens in a novel, you know that you're in the presence of a masterpiece. Now, masterpiece is not a word that I would throw around easily, but I wouldn't have any reservations in saying that The Stranger is a masterpiece. Now, there is a lot in this novel that is left unresolved, and it is up to the reader to solve it, once again. The Stranger is not a neat narrative that you can come away from feeling better about yourself. It is a novel that will make you think both as you read it and once you shut it closed for the last time. It is a novel that will stay with you for a long time. The fact, I think, that I first read The Stranger when I was about 13, 14 years old is probably what made a huge impact on me. But I think that this novel will still make a big impact on anyone, regardless regardless of how old they are when they read it. I guess there is a caveat to this. You need to be willing to put in some work as you read it, okay? If you just pick it up, race through it because it's a short book with simple language, so because of all the simplicity, the length, you race through it, you breeze through it, you might miss out on the point completely. And boy, wouldn't that be a waste of your time, so don't do that, okay? Meursault is someone who people find strange within the novel, so other characters. And I guess readers might also find him strange. Incidentally, I never did find him that strange, but he is someone who seems indifferent to what happens to him or people close to him, right? So things that happened around him. The novel opens famously when he learns that his mother has died in the old people's home where she lived. And this is not a spoiler, it is literally the first sentence of the novel, right? That event kicks off the rest of the narrative. Meursault's indifference to the news that his mother has died sets the tone for the rest of the novel. That beginning, I think, is one of the most memorable beginnings I have ever read in a novel. Now, there is a distance, not only between Meursault and the other characters that he encounters throughout the novel, but I think there's also, more importantly, a distance, I think, between Meursault and us, the readers. Now, what makes Meursault so strange? Throughout the novel, he never behaves as other characters and even some readers would expect him to behave. At first, that almost seems like a quirk of his, but later, his ostensive indifference actually lands him in a lot of hot water. Meursault gets into a lot of trouble because of his absurd behavior, right? Behavior that doesn't make sense to other people. But is he completely alienated and incapable of any empathy? I don't think so. I think Meursault just doesn't show how he feels in a socially acceptable way. And that makes people, and I'm talking about other characters here now, misunderstand him and actually judge him wrong. Is he not sad about his mother's death, or does he just not show it as people might expect him to? Other characters, and perhaps many readers, might find the way Meursault behaves during his mother's wake at the beginning of the novel, and what he does when he gets back to Algiers immediately after the wake, strange or even inappropriate, okay? And I'm not going to go into what that is because I don't want to spoil the novel. But the fact is that Meursault doesn't conform to any preconceived notions as to how a person should behave in those circumstances. But what is acceptable in those circumstances and why? And who says so? Okay, so just because Meursault doesn't cry or because he can't wait to go back home during the wake, is he a monster? Isn't life supposed to go on? You know, we get a lot of mixed messages about how to react to the death of someone who is close and dear to us. Okay, so socially, you're supposed to feel sad and display it by crying, for instance, but just don't be too sad because that would be weird. Okay, don't cry too much, but cry a little. Okay, life goes on, we are told. You need to move on. You're not supposed to dwell on grief, right? So those are the contradictory messages that we get. So Meursault does not only not play by those rules, by society's rules, but he seems baffled by them. So it is not like what happens in the novel is senseless or nonsensical. The events narrated make sense. They do make sense. What is lacking is what you get from, for instance, a Victorian novels, or more relevant French 19th century novels, for instance. So what is missing here What is lacking here is a narrator that organizes all the episodes for you and brings, let's say, a consciousness to all the episodes. So here, all you have is a character who seems indifferent to what happens to him, and that indifference, that ostensive indifference, takes him to a hideous extreme at some point, which I won't say what it is exactly. Let's say that he commits a heinous crime and he doesn't even know or understand what made him do it. So he doesn't know why he did what he did. And there is no explanation to it. There is no moral lesson for the reader to learn out of that. At least nothing explicit in the text. So the reader never knows where the story is going, and I think that's great, okay? You never know what will happen to Meursault when you first read the novel. There is no logic to anything, no narrative logic, okay? Just like in real life, okay? So that's why I think critics classify The Stranger sometimes as an absurdist novel. But why is Meursault the way he is? What are his motivations? Those questions, other questions like that, are never answered in The Stranger. They're never answered within the novel. It is up to the reader, once again, to try to work out the answers for herself. Now, for me, what I would say about it is that The Stranger is a compelling novel. It is one of those books that I can never put down until I'm done with it, no matter how many times I read it, and I've read it many times. I can easily now read it in one sitting, but that's because I've read it so many times, you know. So I'm not suggesting here that you read it in one sitting if you have never read it before. Actually, I would suggest that you take your time with it. But in the meantime, why don't you let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, whether you've read The Stranger or not. My name is Juan. This is all from me. I hope you are all doing extremely well. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope to see you again very, very soon for another book review. Bye for now.